This has to do with change, modification, alter, adding, and deleting. And the keywords that we use are methods, digesting, and hashing. Keep those very handy. And I will all week long say, asking you, so I'll say keyword alert, and you have to quickly find the keyword. And that will tune you into the material yet even quicker. All right, so in this case, the CIA triad. All right, these are the three major goals or principles with information security. So in a security plan, you attempt to mitigate threats. What does mitigate mean?
Minimize.
Minimize or reduce. Exactly. So minimize threats or risks to, again, your asset. An asset value sits right in the center here, and you need to protect it from improper changes, or to prevent it from being disclosed to people, or to make sure that it's constantly available to you, or to anybody else who needs it that's supposed to need it.
Excuse me, is there any keywords for availability that you have?
Keywords for availability, although availability is more of the redheaded stepchild of the triad, unfortunately. It doesn't get as much attention, and you have to build it into your architecture. So common keywords that I use would be fault tolerance, anything with high availability, failover, clustering, raids, backup SANs, anything to keep your data available is going to be a keyword there. So just to run through the list again, that would be a RAID, high availability, clustering, failover, active passive failovers, anything with high availability. Escrows even, right? You could say escrow, a third party where you keep your stuff. You can throw in escrows. And this is not an exhaustive list. We'll be adding to this list as we go. So as I see keywords, I'm going to add them to our IAC triad. So here's a whole list of keywords here too. So mechanisms to protect information from being disclosed. So it should make sense that if I say unauthorized disclosure has to deal with actually getting the information to someone, like I accidentally disclosed it, so I told you something I wasn't supposed to tell you. So that speaks to confidentiality. You know, in your practice test questions, they don't always come out and say confidentiality. But they will say you need to protect against unauthorized disclosure. And you need to go, oh, wait a second, that's an IAC triad keyword, and that goes in, here. And so we can protect the IAC triad with encryption. If you encrypt something, it prevents unauthorized people from actually being able to view it. And the whole reason we classify data is to determine levels of protection. How secret, what's the level of secrecy that you need to keep it. And once you specify, okay, this is top secret, you're going to need a way for people to authenticate themselves and prove that they have a clearance and the need to know to actually get the information. Agree or disagree?
Agree.
You guys have highlighters? You need highlighters? I have some highlighters in the car. You want some highlighters? All right? There's some more. So ways that confidentiality can be breached, you got social engineering. Why is social engineering an attack on confidentiality?
Because they're striving to get unauthorized access.
Right. If I just stand over your shoulder and I look at something and it's meant for your eyes and I happen to see it, then that's disclosure. If I just plug into the network and sniff the traffic, why is that an attack on confidentiality?
Unauthorized access.
Because you're not supposed to have that access.
Again, so unauthorized disclosure. Or what if I had the ability to steal files or shoulder surf, things like that. Could be just as something is a user being unaware and just mishandling something because they don't know any better, because they weren't there that day in the security awareness training class, right? All right, so integrity. Watch for the keyword differences. Prevent unauthorized. Oh, there you go. Unauthorized modification of data. Tools to maintain integrity. It can be intrusion detection. It can be actually encryption too, but that's kind of a trick. Okay? if I classify something as top secret and you don't have access to it, I can't disclose it to you because you don't have the clearance, well then you can't change it either. So it's dominated by confidentiality in the traditional it's been encrypted sense, but it also prevents you from making an unauthorized change because you can't get access to it. But more so, there are other elements of encryption that will actually check the integrity. For example, in digital signatures, you have a message digest or an MD5 or SHA hash on a digital signature. And you can use that to guarantee that there are no unauthorized modifications, alterations, deletions, etc., etc., etc.
Non-repudiation is the following one.
What's that?
Non-repudiation.
What about it?
That's exactly the following.
What I do is this. I split integrity, because of course I couldn't leave well enough alone. So this is my unofficial hybrid model of the IAC triad, CIA. I split it into authenticity and non-repudiation. Okay, and because when we get into cryptography, you'll see that the subject of non-repudiation, authenticity, and integrity work very, very close together. It's easier to extend non-repudiation and authenticity from integrity than it is secrecy or confidentiality. But we'll get to that here shortly. You guys are with me? Say uh-huh. Mm-hmm. All right. All right, so ways that integrity can be breached. First, and the obvious one is uneducated users. Another way is malicious code. Not exhaustive, or suck. Here, your availability. Let's see if we can pick out some keywords here. In other words, we need for this information to be available. So we're going to make it available. So we can do that by keyword backup systems. When you have the proper environmental controls like heating, humidity, electricity, things like that, when all of that's working in its pristine sense, that also will contribute to your data being available. You don't have things like line noise or transient noise, which is just the disturbance on a line. You don't have that interfering or attempting to corrupt hard drives. You also could make things like quality of service. When you have a high quality service, things tend to be more available. All right, so things that can affect availability would be things like denial of service. If I put a denial of service on the company and you can't get access to your resources because I'm consuming your network bandwidth, well, that would be a problem. Could be improperly configured systems, like for example, default usernames and passwords on a router. I get access to that, and then I can go play with your router. Maybe I decide to shut it down for a while, and then you can't access it either. And also malicious code can affect the availability of systems, right? If you get a virus outbreak, right, and all of your systems are affected, you can't use them either. Agree or disagree? Agree. All right. So let's go over some basic security definitions. If you'd like easy points in your practice exams, you will know vulnerabilities, threats, risks, exposures, and countermeasures. So let's start putting these in major categories. What would be a virus? Okay, yes, it's a threat. That doesn't mean that you're vulnerable to it, does it? No, your viruses will go out on the internet all the time, but that doesn't mean that you're vulnerable. So if I say an unpatched system,
Vulnerability.
all of this will make up risk, but that would be a vulnerability within the system, which would pose a risk.
Are these ordered?
Not necessarily.
You indicated by what you just said that these are kind of ordered.
I would say that they all interrelate, not necessarily ordered though.
Okay.
Because you could talk about, if you want to go with your risk calculations, you normally have threats times vulnerabilities. Well, that will contribute to risks. So there's different ways of looking at it. Right here, for right now, we'll just list them out. Or if you want to go with this flowchart, you could say there's a vulnerability. Now there may be a threat that could take advantage of me, which increases my risk of exposure. And if I don't put a countermeasure in place, I'm up to my toes in mud. So let's say you get infected with the SASR99 virus. That would be an instance of
Exposure.
an exposure. Let's say I update my antivirus signatures. That would be a countermeasure. Exactly. So there's the attack surface. As security professionals, we want to minimize the attack surface. It basically states that you want to reduce the area of attack. That's why we add in controls. That's why we have layered defenses. So the attack surface is really, how can I break in? How can I affect integrity, confidentiality, and availability? Any questions? All right, so vulnerability. I want you to circle a weakness in a system. Your keyword for vulnerability is a weakness in a system. Those are your keywords. Again, we're going to play the game of keywords because it's a lot easier to remember a handful of keywords than it is, 1,100 pages of notes. So a weakness in a system. So those weaknesses could exist, for example, if you didn't patch your systems, didn't have current virus definitions, you had an improper configured firewall, or maybe it was just relaxed physical security. All of those could contribute to weaknesses in systems. And for that matter, you could also say there's physical weaknesses, administrative weaknesses, technical weaknesses, and operational weaknesses too, if you like. Hence the value of the chart. And we could put in controls, such as preventative controls, preventative, detective, deterrent, corrective, compensative, etc., etc. So threats. Threat, circle the keyword, potential hazard. Potential hazard. Now there's a couple different ways to look at threats. You could say internal threats versus external threats. In any instance, the threats are going to take advantage of your vulnerability. So what is a vulnerability? Weakness in a system. Threats take advantage of that weakness in a system. Could be something as simple as open ports on uneducated users, or maybe environmental factors such as heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. Next, you got risk. Circle the keyword probability of the threat taking advantage of the vulnerability. So it's a probability. And we can measure that quantitatively and qualitatively. We'll get to that a little bit later. Higher risk comes with more vulnerabilities and increased threats. Like for example, if you ever connected your Wi-Fi on your laptops, it would normally ask you your very, very last screen, it'll say, hey, what are you connecting to? Is this a public network, a private network? Where are you? And it's simply specifying what's available based on what you click. If you're in a public area, things get locked down more. If you're at home, things are things like file sharing are naturally enabled. Then an exposure. Exposure means something bad happened. Your IAC triad has been affected in some way. An instance of exposure. It could be something like data deletion or modification or loss of integrity in any way, shape, or form. It could be through malicious code. And it could be something like disclosure to unauthorized viewing of credit cards, social security numbers, phone numbers, etc., etc. Either way, we can put these exposures into the IAC triad. So modification, what part of the triad does that belong in? Integrity. Unauthorized viewing of a credit card. Confidentiality.
So exposure is the, it requires that the risk has been taken advantage of, or
Yes.
Or exposure, does exposure simply mean that you are exposed to the risk?
No, the latter. In other words, something has now affected the IAC triad. All right, so there was a threat out there, your system was vulnerable, now you actually got that malicious code or advanced persistent threat, whatever the case is, and now somehow the integrity of your data, or it could be data at rest or data in transit, nonetheless, the integrity has been affected, or confidentiality-wise, something has been disclosed that shouldn't have been disclosed. Could it be something as simple as I know what type of server you have, as opposed to not knowing what type of server you have. Because maybe I could take that type of server and that build number and then go research that and find more vulnerabilities. So it's actually an instance of risk, where risk actually has an exposure, meaning you have been infected. So countermeasures. Countermeasure is a control that you put in place, and there's all sorts of countermeasures that you can put in place. You could have preventative countermeasures, detective countermeasures, deterrence, corrective, recovery, etc., etc., etc. See where I'm going with that? Is that your chart? Processes and standards are used to combat and reduce the risk. So ultimately, the countermeasure needs to reduce the risk that's out there. Some things that naturally reduce risk, or a good countermeasure per se, would be, keep on the latest and greatest service packs, virus definitions, things like that. Actually train your staff. Have access control systems in place. Use biometric devices. Make sure everybody's properly trained and aware. Sir?
This does not take into account the corrective measures to correct from exposure. You're not talking, nowhere here or anywhere else have you talked about what I'm going to do to fix the exposure problem.
Like transfer the risk, reduce the risk,
No.
buy insurance?
To clean out your systems, for example. The fact that I put in new service packs and update virus does not necessarily clean out my backups or other kinds of things that I may have done. So there's other things that obviously would have to be done here to clean up an exposed system. If it was hacked and information was stolen, that's a different problem. But there's nothing here to talk about how.
So I'm kind of hearing two different things.
Yes.
And what you're saying, this is what it means to me. This is my background's in incident response. You identify, you prepare obviously ahead of time to prevent things from happening. In the event that something does happen, you need the ability to detect it happening. Then there's the eradication, which is basically remove the bad stuff. And then there's the recovery, which is, okay, let's restore from a trusted, known good source, or a clean media, basically, or something we trust, or make sure our data still has integrity and all that other stuff. So you can throw a life cycle into this. These are just high-level examples, though, but still a valid point in terms of the life cycle of incident response, because in the countermeasure, it doesn't say how you actually eradicated the situation. What did you do to remove whatever bad stuff was there?
So if we look at these security definitions from vulnerability through countermeasures, none of this is really in the recovery mode. None of this is all, this attack surface
Just
really is not
purely
getting-
high level. We haven't thrown in life cycle into it yet. So right now, what we're kind of doing, big picture wise, we're just kind of listing the stuff out, and we're going to start assembling this into life cycle eventually.
Okay.
But good observation. I was very intuitive. All right, so you got to have a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach.
Yes.
So which one's better, top-down or bottom-up?
Gotta have both.
Let me see.
I got one for bottom-up.
Top down.
Gotta
I
have
got one for two for top-down.
both.
It depends is a great answer. You can't have purely one, this is the way it's going to be from the top, because you know what they say, falls downhill, right? You can't just have, this is the way it's going to be, because by the time that message gets to the bottom, you're going to have people going, well, why in the heck are we doing it this way? Have you ever seen the TV show, Undercover CEO?
Undercover boss.
Undercover Boss, right? And there was the classic example of waste management, where basically the policy is you need to stick to your route, this, that, and the other.
Be on time.
And what they had learned from that is like there was no error for even somebody needing to use a restroom.
Yeah.
So the poor lady on the episode, she had to basically carry around her own method of going to the restroom. And so when the boss went out and spent the day with her, he goes like, man, this policy sucks. I mean, how could you, I can't have this.
Yeah.
And so you have to have a balance between what trickles down from upper management, but also how does that affect the people on the floor. And in the same way, there's also the bottom up. In many cases, the upper management people need the information on the bottom, like your incident responders, right? Let's say if your incident responders are the lower management, they also need to be able to report to upper management to say, look, this is how hot the fire is. What should we do? Okay, pull them out. Okay, so yeah, a little balance of this goes a long way. However, for the sake of the ISC squared exam, understand that upper management has the overall responsibility, and they're the ones that are liable. So they need to be the ones standing behind the organization and cheerleading the organization to success. because they assume full responsibility.
So pretty much it's based on them championing it.
It's completely champion oriented. Raise your hand if you're a PMP. Anybody at all? You're PMP? Okay. Because I can speak that language too. All right, so you gotta have your I call them cheerleaders, but champion or cheerleaders here as well. So there's the champion for the organization as a whole. That is really anybody with a C in their title, Chief Information Officer, CEO, things like that. But then there's also mid-level management, which has more of a granular, functional, day-to-day touch. They're the people that are closest to the day-to-day needs of the organization. All right. Next, you got organizational security models. You need a plan to get secure, ultimately, is what we need to do. So these organizational security components, these tend to be frameworks so that you can plug in different modules of security. So in this case, what we're speaking to is framework. My teaching way of describing framework is an ice cube tray. An ice cube tray is the framework so you can put in water, which will turn to ice cubes. And in this case, the ice cubes could be physical, administrative, technical, operational controls, or preventative, detective, deterrent, corrective, or however you want to divide it up. It's just a framework so that you can substitute different components in and out. Agree or disagree? All right. Would you like some easy points on your practice exam?
Yeah.
All right. I know, but I gotta get your attention anyway. So don't say I didn't ask, right? Somebody should keep a tally on how many times they'll say you want some free points in your practice exams. All right, so you got to understand the planning horizon. This is about as far out as you can see into the future. So you can break this down into strategic goals, operational goals, and tactical goals, and circle those. Operational goals and tactical goals. Whoops. So at this point, I just want to go to the big picture here. Planning horizon is as far as you can see into the future, and we're going to look at the operational, tactical, and goals next. So let's just do it. You got strategic goals, tactical goals, and operational goals. Everybody got that? So here's what I want you to write down. Operational goals, circle day to day. If you have a service background, normally your day-to-day goals are your tactical goals. Here it's going to be different. Here operational means day to day. So, your daily shift reports, your daily reports, that's day to day, which would be your operational goals. Okay? Your tactical goals, weeks or months. I like to refer to that as short term. So write down tactical equals short term. You could throw in change configuration or change management into that as well, because that's how you get things into production over the short term.
Why do they do that?
Do what?
Change tactical and operational in terms of what the heck they mean? That's going to be the biggest problem for me on this test, guarantee.
Well, now you know. And G.I. Joe said knowing is half the battle.
Yeah.
It says operational goals and then it defines that as short-term goals. And then on the next one it says tactical goals, weeks or months.
So it's like operational and all, like today, short term.
Here's what I'm telling you. Here's what I'm telling you. Operational, day to day. Tactical, short term, weeks. Use my wording. I'm the one prepping you for the exam, so I like to think I have some sort of responsibility in seeing you right direction. So, in this case, a little guidance goes a long way. Despite who actually wrote the slides.
So he's banging his foot.
Bang your head against the table, right? All right. Strategic is more of long term. Circle long term. This could be several budgeting quarters, for example. What are we doing in the third quarter versus the fourth quarter? Longer term, or even 1, 3, and 5 year plans. That would also be under strategic or long term. Whether, let's go back, with tactical, that could actually be more towards weeks, months, or quarters. Whereas strategic, that's years basically. So what are we doing in the first year of the contract versus the third year of the contract versus the fifth year of the contract? All right, so you could say like in 5 years we'd like to upgrade all of our smart cards. That would be a strategic plan. Go ahead, what's your question?
Did I miss something on TCO? No, go to lower TCO. Did I miss something, an acronym somewhere?
What is TCO, total cost of ownership?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, TCO, sorry about that.
I just
TCO
wondered
is
if I
total
missed
cost of
something.
ownership.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
strategically over 5 years, let's reduce the total cost of ownership, right? So there's all sorts of ways to do it, and this is no definitive list here, so you can pick any one of these examples and go, oh yeah, that's what, we implemented smart cards for whatever reason. All right, there's also the public sector versus the private sector. You have government and non-government. See the difference in the way they operate? Government tends to have unlimited money, right? That's the fallacy of that. So they have the time and the resources, in theory, time and the resources to actually do this stuff. Whether the private sector, they don't necessarily care to spend all of their time and money tracking stuff down, because it's more about productivity and let's make sure that we're profitable first. Whether our government's primary role is not to be profitable.
Because it's easier convincing a commercial entity that they need to do it, because you can always, you always focus them back on their risk to their income.
Okay.
With the military organization, it's much more difficult to define the risks.
Does red tape mean anything to you?
Yeah.
I'll say it's not. I would not. It's not always easy to convince commercial entities on their risk exposure.
But if you can tie it to dollar value,
Even tying it to dollar value, the DCO we were doing was related to electric power grid and the vulnerabilities associated with electric power grid. Most electric companies are assuming the risk with that because they don't want to spend the money it would take to secure themselves, so they're accepting the risk.
But they're accepting the risk based on a value judgment.
No.
It costs me more to secure it than I'm going to lose when I've happened.
They're based on an uninformed cost analysis.
Well, that's
Because when you inform the folks of the risk and cost, they change their mind.
Yeah, and that's what I'm.
So it's an uninformed cost analysis.
That's what I'm.
Okay.
Okay. So public versus private. So risk management and risk analysis. Risk management is the process of detecting, determining, and actually reducing risk to an acceptable level. What I want everybody to do is highlight reduce risk to acceptable level. The reason being is because you can never have a risk of zero. You can have risk that's very, very low, but it's never going to be zero. Never going to be impossible. Don't forget divine intervention can play a role in that. So this is the whole life cycle component of it here. It's the identification of risks, tracking of risks, the mitigation of risks, and it happens over and over and over and over again on some sort of regular frequency. So areas of risks, things like risk to physical damage. So let's play see if we can do it this way. What part of the IAC triad would, if something is physically damaged, what part of the IAC triad? Okay, so it's physical damage, that assumes that the UK, now we can't use it, and there you go. But what about it's physically damaged? Could I just throw the hard drive away?
Then you have maybe
Confidentiality.
So it could affect confidentiality as well, too. What about human error? How would that affect your IAC triad? Potentially all of them, exactly. Equipment malfunction, we'll chalk that up to damage. Although it's not exactly the same. Inside versus outside attacks, how would that affect the IAC triad?
Integrity and confidentiality.
And also, there's a larger risk of internal users versus external users. So you got to worry about the internal users changing, which have they have the most access to the data. So those are the people that are worried about changing the integrity or disclosing things that they shouldn't disclose, or loss of data.